Well, good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, and we're continuing with our series on the deep state. Excuse me. And in the last two chapters, we talked about World War II and the deep state operators who, once the war began, were very keen on hiding the fact that their companies, they, as owners of these companies, had financed the rise of Germany, the rise of Nazis, the rise of Hitler, and we're continuing to do business with Germany and these German companies, these Nazi companies. Some of them were in Italy, another fascist country, aiding and abetting our enemies during war. And so the operator that we've been discussing is Alan Dulles, and how he, as a Sullivan and Cromwell deep state operator whose primary task was to protect his clients, their profits, but also their business that they've been doing with our enemies, their assets. And so, as such, he was, even though he was supposedly working for the American government as an intelligence operative, he was really wearing two hats. And so, every consideration, every decision that he made was always first consideration were his clients back home in New York, his Sullivan and Cromwell clients, the guys who, through Brown Brothers and Harriman, had invested so heavily in post World War I Germany and Italy, and now had all kinds of assets tied up in those two countries, and we're trying to protect those assets going forward, and of course immunize themselves from any liability after the war was over. And of course, the guy doing that for them was Alan Dulles. And of course, the other thing that we've established is the fact that these deep state operators have learned after World War I that continuous warfare is the best business model that's ever been invented, or at least to be on a continuous war footing. So their decision was, if we ever get into another one of these wars, we've got to manufacture, before that war is even over, the next war. We've got to somehow gin up the next war, create a new boogeyman, scare the American people, wave the red flag, and keep that war footing going forward so that we can continue to make all this money from a wartime economy. And so you have several things at play here. What I want to do today is talk about the decision to get into World War II, because it's not a slam dunk. Now, in the view of these deep staters, it is. They're they're itching to get into this war. They've got their backsides protected, and now they have an opportunity to make a bunch more money again, like they did in World War One. But the American people aren't on board. And as we saw during the Spanish-American War lead up, and also during the World War One lead up, there's going to be some pump priming that needs to take place. And I want to, in this episode, give the status update where the American people are. And then tomorrow in episode, I guess this is 18, episode 19 or chapter 19, talk about how that pump does get primed, culminating in December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. You have these moments in time where the country can go either direction. The ship of state is trying to decide which way it's going to go. And after the Civil War, we saw the rise of corporations, the ultra vires doctrine, and these big robber barons just create these absolutely huge companies, corporations, and as such, they become the controllers of the U.S. economy and the U.S. government. That's the direction we were going. And in the election of 19, and 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 a decision was made at some point that these big corporatists, these big robber barons, deep state power elite types, needed foreign territory to continue to grow. I heard a definition of capitalism is every year your business has to grow. That's capitalism. So there's a lid on these corporations, how big they can grow inside the territorial boundaries of the United States. There's a finite amount of resources. There's a finite amount of markets, consumers. Um, there's a finite amount of cheap labor. Uh, Obviously, there's a finite amount of land. And if you aren't growing, somebody else is growing at your expense. Social Darwinism says if you're not the one conquering, someone's going to conquer you. So if you're one of these big business owners, you're thinking we need foreign territories. Hence the purchase of Alaska, hence the theft of Hawaii, hence the Spanish-American War to get Spain's colonies, hence the sphere of influence, the open door letter and policy concerned China and Japan and the Far East, hence the Panama Canal, hence the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which now stipulates that Latin America and South America are part of America's sphere of influence. All right. So when the Spanish-American War ended, we're in one of these moments where the country has to decide, is this new direction at work? Is this what we want? We want to be a colonizing, imperializing power. Remember, that's how we got our start. We were somebody else's colony. We didn't like it. We fought a war of revolution to free ourselves from the bondage of Britain's empire. But now we're willing to do that to other countries. And then the election of 1900 was a moment in time when the American people had a choice. The Republican Party was William McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, and these were the ones that were the imperialists. And then the Democrat nominee was William Jennings Bryan, who said we should go back to the isolationist past. The American people overwhelmingly chose imperialism when they selected or voted for McKinley and Roosevelt. That was one of those moments in time where we had a choice as a people to decide which direction we were going to go. We chose to go forward. In other words, we chose the deep state. We chose their side. Everything they wanted, they got. Their guy won. Now, there was some pushback. We talked about the Chicago movement, the rise of the progressives. And domestically, we run into a string of progressive presidents, Teddy, Taft, Wilson, who here at home pass all sorts of progressive reforms, which are reforms at least advertised to be for the people, not for these power elites. Women right to vote, prohibition, anti-labor laws for children, the creation of a public school system, on and on it goes. But though we are operating a little bit more progressively domestically from a foreign perspective, these three progressive presidents continued on the march to a world empire. I mean, it was Teddy Roosevelt who interfered in the Russo-Japanese War. He earned himself a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts, but as to protect our sphere of influence, namely our emerging trade relationship with China. It was Teddy Roosevelt who sent the Great White Fleet to Japan to intimidate them into leaving China alone. It was Teddy Roosevelt who sent the fleet again to Colombia to intimidate them into giving up Panama so we could negotiate with Panama the rights to the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt was a very progressive president here at home, busting up these big monopolies, trusts, whatever. But abroad, he was giving these robber barons, these deep state operators, these power elites, everything they wanted. Then Taft did the same thing through his dollar diplomacy, playing the part of sugar daddy or Santa Claus. Instead of using the military to bully people, he used money to buy people. And the net effect is the same. Then you had Wilson come along who says, well, he's probably our most progressive president here at home. But abroad, though he promised in his campaign not to interfere, especially militarily, in foreign affairs, and not to stoop to the level of Taft trying to buy the loyalties of foreign countries and territories. He said, we're going to treat everybody with respect. And the assumption was he was going to sort of take a step back, but he didn't. He was the guy who sent the military to Haiti. He was the guy who sent the military to Mexico. He was the guy who ultimately sent the military to World War I, to Europe. Because by the time Wilson was president, we had accumulated a world empire. We have assets scattered around the world to protect. We have a military base in the Philippines to protect our sphere of influence in the Far East. We have trade beginning with Japan and China. We've got to protect that. We've got a military base in Cuba to protect our sphere of influence in Latin and South America. We're growing sugarcane in Cuba. We've got Puerto Rico and Guam and Wake Island as a result of the Spanish-American War. We have a canal that we dug through Panama. We have a territory that's now ours. We've annexed it in Hawaii that will soon become a state. We got to protect all that. And so the Spanish-American War gave us the territories that now in World War I we have to protect. So Wilson, though he made all these claims in his campaign, he didn't have a choice. Just like presidents today, in a lot of cases, still have a choice. They are informed what they're going to do, what the facts of life are. Then you get into the interwar years, and as a result of World War I, after we protected our assets and expanded upon them, began these deep staters start now investing heavily in Germany, Italy, some of these places that were devastated by World War I, with the idea that we now create our own sphere of influence there. And they have a lot of money tied up as a result of Brown Brothers Harriman doing its investment banking work, lining up these contracts, creating these relationships. They have their backside covered by Sullivan and Cromwell. They're making money, a lot of money. We talked yesterday in chapter 17, two of the biggest companies in Germany are Germany/Italy, which are kind of one and the same in World War II, were GM and GE. These are American companies. And they're both clients of Sullivan and Cromwell, which means Allen Dulles is representing both of them. And they're all worried when we get to the end of the war if their assets are going to be destroyed, if they're going to be, burned up in a as the German forces retreat, are they going to destroy all these assets? The Allies can't get them. And anyway, this necessitated Dulles to negotiate a secret surrender with the Nazis in Italy and immunize strategic Nazis so as to protect the assets of his clients, but also to provide benefit going forward in the new war that he's stoking up with the Soviets. We need intelligence assets. These Germans are better than anything we got. So that's the story or the backstory. So that first chance that we had as American people to go back to our isolationist past was the election of 1900. But we didn't. And so that results in a continued foreign intervention. That results in a rerun, essentially, of the Spanish-American War when we get involved in World War II. The same method. Propagandize the American people. In the Spanish-American War, it was yellow press. It was our press intentionally slanting their coverage against Spain, so that the American people would have a boogeyman. And then it was the manufacture of evidence with that alleged letter from the Spanish ambassador calling our president weak and stupid. That arouses the jingoistic spirit of the American people. How dare a foreigner insult our president? Adding to the net effect of the boogeyman. And then thirdly, a false flag, blowing up our own ship, blaming it on Spain. Next day, declare war. That was Spanish-American War. Fast forward World War One, and because Britain needs us in the war, especially because Russia's dropping out, Britain is our special ally with whom we have a special relationship. This time, it's Britain who propagandizes the American people because they cut the transatlantic cable. So all information we're getting is filtered through Britain. So it's all going to be anti-German and pro-allies, pro-Britain. And then you got the manufacturer of evidence, the Zimmerman note, who you talk to historians, half of them believe it's legitimate, the other half don't. It's never been produced. Again, a letter that's published to us from Britain, and Germany's trying to negotiate with Mexico to have Mexico help them defeat America, which isn't even in the war yet. And as in exchange, after the war is over, Germany wins, Mexico would get Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico back, whatever. That's the manufacture of evidence. And then thirdly, the false flag, sending the Lusitania into harm's way, making sure it had an American flag on it, making sure it was full of Americans. But boom, it gets sunk. Next day, America declares war. And I mentioned, it is my belief, the Americans and the British were working together on that whole campaign because the Americans who counted, ones in leadership, wanted to get in the war to help Britain, wanted to protect our assets, and wanted to be at the peace table afterwards. But we got to somehow convince these American people, these rubes, that don't know what's good for them. And if we're not if we can have an ally assist in the propagandizing of American people, of the manufacture of evidence and false flag, that gives us plausible deniability. It achieves the same result. Britain wants us in. They're heavily motivated. They're losing the war. They need us. We're heavily motivated. We want to be at that peace table. We want to protect all our assets, our empire. We want to help Britain. So we colluded with Britain, collaborated, it's my belief, I can't prove it, to achieve that desired result through the, again, propaganda, manufacture of evidence, false flag. Same exact MO. You know, it's you look back and you learn from history, hopefully, and you realize, man, we had a chance in that 1900 election to retreat from this posture, this very aggressive, forward-looking posture that has culminated today in the United States becoming the world's policeman. We're everywhere. The election of 1900 could have stopped that, or at least slowed it down, changed it. That was the first. Then we had the Chautauqua movement, which created the progressive presidents, and they dabbled in progressive reforms here at home, but abroad, again, as I say, the empire continued to grow. But we have a second opportunity to call a halt to this forward march, to this colonizing empire that we're creating. And that is in the lead up to World War II. Because again, the Europeans are going to be at war way before we do. And we have a choice to make. And we now have the benefit of a little bit of history to look back on and say, it's interesting when the Spanish-American War was being advertised or promoted, we'd never been in a foreign war. When the election of 1900 was talking about, should we have colonies or should we not? We'd never had colonies before. When World War I was being promoted and America's involvement was desired, we'd never been in a world war before. All of those things were new. But now in World War II, course, without us in it, it's not a world war yet. But if we join, it will be. And we now have the benefit of hindsight. We have been in one of these before. And furthermore, here at home, we're in the middle of a Great Depression. Whereas in World War I, we were on the brink of the roaring 20s. The economy was good. It was roaring. It was fixing to. And we were just in a much better position economically and socially, emotionally, culturally, and in just about every way. The Great Depression had a devastating effect on obviously the economy, which most people focus on, but also our culture. Men, for example, who couldn't get jobs, either ran away on trains, became hobos, or committed suicide. A lot of them just wiped out men. Women had to hold everything together. So that had huge cultural and social ramifications. It's called a depression because we were literally depressed as a people. We lost our mojo. We thought our best days were behind us. And economically, it's Armageddon. Homeless people everywhere you look, unemployed everywhere you look, underemployed, people in soup lines, starving, living in shanty towns. Some families, so destitute, moms had to sell their kids so the kids could live. I mean, it was a bad time to be asking American people to go to World War II. And we've just come off World War I. It was supposedly the war that ended all wars, and it killed more people, 20 million, than any war in world history. What would World War II look like? And then there's a feeling in America, yes, we've got the rise of these totalitarian dictators, these fascist dictators. But isn't that Hitler's? Isn't that Germany, Europe's problems? Why are we getting sucked into Europe's problems again? The majority of the American people felt this way. And so something's going to have to be done to change their minds. The Nye Committee, we talked briefly about that. All the money that was made during World War I concluded, this is a Senate committee, concluded that our involvement in World War I was a conspiracy by merchants of death, bankers and arms dealers, who made hundreds, 200, 300, in some cases up to 700% increases in their profits during time of war. In other words, it was blood money. But it wasn't just them, obviously. The Nye Committee pinned it on the bankers and the arms merchants, but farmers did real well too. And so there's this sneaking suspicion by a lot of these anti-war isolationists in America that the folks that want us to get involved in these wars are the ones that are just make the most money from them. It's about money. And the Nye Committee, with its conclusions, sort of put their stamp of approval on that belief. So as a result, Congress, responding to pressure, passed the Neutrality Acts of 35, 36, and 37, which said that to prevent a Lusitania from happening again, a Lusitania kind of a type event from happening again, Americans could not sail on any ship that was owned by warring nations. Remember, the Lusitania is full of Americans, had an American flag on it, but that was a British ship. Secondly, it said that Americans couldn't make loans or sell weapons or ammunition to any nation involved in the war, belligerents. So these neutrality acts are trying to remove any financial motivation from participating in this war. And here's the thing, they know common sense tells you if you start doing business with one side, not the other, that's going to be viewed as an act of war against the side you're not doing business with. Or if you do business with both, uh, all your business is now fair game to be attacked by both sides. And that's the kind of thing that can provoke your side into joining one side or the other. So we're just not going to do business with them, which means no one's going to make any money. And then to keep the loss of life from happening, getting us sucked into another war like the Lusitania did, we're just not going to let our people sail on their ships. Because again, we've got the Germans using their subs to sink a lot of ships that are heading back and forth in the Atlantic or entering British water, territorial waters, whatever. So that becomes a way to, that's what the point of these neutrality laws was. Then we have a committee called the America First Committee, famously. And it had some pretty prominent individuals on that committee, including Charles Lindbergh, who's a legitimate American hero. And he became, he was he was a pilot. But in his post-piloting days as a hero to the American people, he became very political. And he advocated through this America First Committee that the real threats to America were the Soviets and the Japanese, not the Germans, not the Italians. And so his view was if we give any aid to the Allies, Britain in particular, we get sucked into World War II like we did the first time. His fear is of communism and this extreme nationalism that it is represented by Japan. The fascism, a lot of people don't understand what fascism is. Fascism, I hear this term thrown around so much. Fascism is literally the marriage between big government and big business, whereby they sort of work together to help each other and make fantastic sums of money. I don't know if you're aware, you should be if you've been paying attention to these videos, is that's exactly what's been happening in America to this point. The rise of big business took place after the Civil War. And initially we had the separation between private sector and public sector, where the private sector practiced ultra vires, maximizing their profits at the expense of the public interest. And they immunized themselves from any and all liability. But there was still a public sector that represented the people. But that line got blurred when these robber barons, these deep state power elites, began funneling millions of dollars into Washington to control these politicians. And then when we get to World War I and these politicians invite these big business tycoons into the government to help run the war effort, you see a marriage there take place between big business, the public sector and the private sector. And then after World War I, we have the election of 3 consecutive power elite presidents in a move away from these progressive presidents. And we enter into a decade of what we call the Roaring '20s, where America's wealth was unparalleled around the world. And it was, as Calvin Coolidge said, a return to the days when America's business is, the business of America is business. And now, on the cusp of World War II, we have a fully immersed private sector, public sector, one within the other. They are indistinguishable. FDR, copying Woodrow Wilson's approach, is going to invite, again, the best and brightest minds from the private sector into the government to help run the war effort. It was so successful in World War I, we'll do it again in World War II. And everyone around the world, all our allies, when we do get dragged into this war, are going to need our weapons, our food. And that's where these big business tycoons and the government are going to start to work together and become literally a fascist entity. If you're just going by the definition of fascism, the marriage of big business and big government, the prioritizing of big business, these corporations over the people, it is literally when our government begins practicing ultravirus itself in the interest of making profits. They immunize themselves, and all the people. That's all Alan Dulles has been up to. Immunize as an official, a government employee, intelligence officer. He's been immunizing our enemies, immunizing these big business guys, his clients. Everywhere you look, immunity, immunity, immunity for the big business types, the power elites, the deep state. Everywhere you look, maximizing profits for these. And nowhere do you look at the people matter in any of this. That's fascism. So what Charles Lindbergh is saying is, in a sense, he's arguing that communism is our enemy, nationalism is our enemy, but fascism is not our enemy. It's essentially what he's saying. We get to 1939, and by this point in time, Britain is under full assault by the Germans. Battle of Britain. They're getting bombed every night. Churchill's begging for America's help. But he's got these neutrality laws, which are tying his hands. He knows it's a replay of World War I all over again. If you remember, what was the moment when the Allies thought they might lose World War I? It was when Russia dropped out of the war. They needed Russia because the United States wasn't in the war yet. They needed Russia to occupy Germany's east flank, force them to fight a two-front war. And when Russia dropped out, it became absolutely imperative that America join, which is exactly what happened. Well, here we are, fast forward to World War II. Russia's not in the war yet. They will be shortly. If you remember, Stalin and Hitler had a pact, a non-aggression pact, a promise not to attack each other. Now, Hitler will violate it, and eventually he'll double-cross Stalin, he'll attack Russia. But without Russia in the war to force Germany to fight a two-front war, to worry about somebody in the East, it's Britain standing alone. France has already given up. All these other countries, every country Germany has attacked has given up, some in days, some in weeks, and some in a month or two. But they've all given up. France surrendered in 30 days. Talk about a paper tiger. France did what France does best. They surrendered. So all you got left is Britain, hanging on for dear life. FDR is a practical man. This is our best. This is our top ally. He knows if we don't join or do something to help Britain, they're going to lose. So he uses every political muscle that he has, every chip he has to play, any leverage he has with Congress, and he gets the Neutrality Act of 1939 pact. And it's interesting. They call it the Neutrality Act. A lot of these times, these laws, what they're called and what they are two different things. Anyway, it lifted some of the prohibitions. Number one, it said belligerent nations at war, could buy U.S. goods if they paid cash and if they carried the product. The cash was The American people were going to go for loans. We still hadn't gotten paid back all our money that we loaned to Britain and France after World War One. So we're not going to go for the loans. So these belligerents, if they can pay cash, they can buy our stuff. But then they have to come across with their own ships and carry it back. Because if we carry it and they sink our ship, that's going to lure us into the war. So it's called cash and carry. Now, there's only one nation that can do that. Germany can't pay. Maybe Germany could pay cash, but they can't carry anything back. They don't have the Navy. You can't load all that stuff up in subs. So when we passed this law, we knew who could take advantage of this. It was only one country, that's Britain. They have the Navy, they have the cash. So this was a law written to help get around the other neutrality laws and help us help Britain. This is a first step in that direction. There's another committee called the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies, who, in contrast to the America First Committee, said we should stay out and not help Britain at all. It's going to lure us into a war. This committee was a little bit more sympathetic to Britain's plight. And their view was, if we don't help Britain, at some point Britain's going to lose, and then the Nazis are going to turn their attention to us. We'll be the next target. And since Britain was fighting for free countries everywhere, the least we could do is send aid to Britain if we're not going to fight. So we have this quandary. And as you're going to learn, some of the reasons why the sympathies are becoming more and more pronounced in America. First of all, we have a lot of people here from Britain. It is our special ally. But secondly, we're going to see some of the same propaganda tactics taking place in the lead up to World War II that took place prior to World War One and prior to the Spanish-American War. I mean, the exact same formula. But I'm saving that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So in September of 1940, we have a link out of Italy and Japan and Germany. This is when Hitler is at his height. He's just rolled through France, and now he's fixing to attack England, or he is attacking England. And Germany and Italy, or Italy and Japan, look at what Germany's doing. They're like, that is an unstoppable juggernaut. Germany's going to take care, and Italy are together going to take care of Europe. Japan is thinking that they'll take care of the Far East Pacific. And if their interests ever intersect, the three of them together would form an unstoppable force. So they signed what's called the Tripartite Pact, and they are now officially allies. So back here in America, we decided to start drafting troops, begin mobilizing, just in case. So you can see, if you're just looking back in history and watching these decisions be made, you can see where we're headed. At first, we're staying out, neutrality. Nobody on these ships. We're not trading with belligerents. By the time we get to 39, we'll trade with the belligerents as long as they pay cash and they come get it. Oh, and we're going to start drafting because we don't know where this is going to go. We know where we want it to go. We don't know where it's going to go. So you start to see the draft. Of course, that's always controversial. Then FDR, after he wins his third election victory in a landslide, decides, well, Britain's starting to run low on cash. And he has some decision-making abilities, some prerogatives he can do on his own that don't require congressional approval. One of these is he can gift to Britain um, war supplies or make a deal with Britain for war supplies, as long as it doesn't require, it's not a treaty, which would require Senate approval, or require a loan, which Congress would have to authorize that. Um, so he gives 50 World War I era battleships to Britain. Now, a lot of these we weren't even using anymore. And so they were borderline scrap. But Britain needed them. And so we give those. And in exchange, we get 8 British defense bases. Now remember, Britain has the biggest world empire in the world. They have bases all over the world. So that's something that they can use to negotiate with. And of course, we're looking for territory to put our bases on. So this is seen as a very smart deal by FDR. But aside from the economic part of it or the tactical or strategic part of it, it is in line with the imperialist mindset, which is to always expand and get more territory. And these military bases qualify as more territory from which we can control, monitor, and govern, and even expand our own empire. So this is a forward-looking move by FDR. Britain gets what it needs now. We get what we want for the future. And of course, it's after he wins his 3rd term. So he's riding high. During his time, he gives his 4 freedoms speech. And you see what's happening. This reminds me of the lead up to the Iraq War in my lifetime, where prominent people in Washington, up to and including President Bush, began giving speeches to the American people, priming the pump, preparing the American people for what's to come, laying the groundwork for what they want, which is a war in Iraq. Here's FDR laying the groundwork for a war that he knows is coming. And he calls it the 4 freedoms speech, and how he believed the Nazis and the Japanese threatened these 4 freedoms. Now, he knew that this would have an impact on Americans because Americans hold these freedoms near and dear to their hearts: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. And he's and the marketing of this speech was hand in hand with these iconic images, these Norman Rockwell paintings, which were classics here in America, to paint a picture. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. To paint a picture of what life would be like, what life is like when you have these freedoms. And the idea is to reinforce the American people's mind how important these are, how much these matter to our everyday lives, our everyday existence. I mean, we all can relate to the Thanksgiving table. We all can relate to a sick child and how fearful that makes us as parents. We all can relate to Sunday morning worship or the right to free speech. We all can relate to that. Now, consider what life would be like without those. And if the Nazis and the Japanese have their way, that's what this world's going to look like, including us. This is an unusual speech to give to a country who is not involved in the war yet. At all. I mean, we're taking measures to protect ourselves in the event it comes to us with a draft and helping Britain out a little bit, but we're on the sidelines in this thing. And it's essentially FDR telling the American people, we need to take a side. We need to decide whose side we're on. You just see this pump being primed. Part of the speech included a reference to what he called the great arsenal of democracy. This is FDR telling the American people, listen, if we're not going to fight, if you don't support us fighting in this war, then there are other ways we can support after we take a side, there are other ways we can provide support. And we can become the arsenal democracy. We can provide what he used the word allies, but it was really just Britain. We can provide what Britain needs to defend those four freedoms. If we're not willing to fight to defend those four freedoms ourselves, then we need to be willing to give Britain what it needs so it can do that heavy lifting. And so you start to see this arsenal of democracy kick into gear. This wartime economy, a retrofitting of our peacetime economy back to a wartime footing, whereby automobile plants are turned into plants for tanks or planes. All the things the war effort is going to need and require. And the second thing that FDR does is he gets another piece of legislation passed that modifies the cash and carry law. Remember, cash and carry says Britain can buy anything it needs from us as long as they can pay cash and as long as they can come carry it back. But at some point, Britain ran out of cash. So cash and carry won't work anymore. So the modification of that law was to create a lend-lease program whereby we would give, it ended up being over $40 billion worth of aid to Britain. It wasn't just Britain. It eventually applied to all our allies once the war expanded. But at this moment, when it was passed, initially applied to Britain. $40 billion worth of aid that we essentially loaned or leased with the idea that we were going to cancel those loans or forgive those loans after the war. In other words, it's a loan by name only. We're helping Britain, who has run out of cash. We are now helping them by giving them. We call it a loan or a lease, but we never intended to, you lease a ship to Britain and after the war take the ship back. You don't want it back. It's probably damaged beyond repair, and the loans are going to be forgiven. So it's a gift, and you can call it whatever you want, but it's a gift. So cash and carry becomes lend-lease. And Germany, which is watching this, Hitler, he knew cash and carry was all about helping Britain. But now the pretenses have been removed and the dollar amounts have gone up. And FDR has cast Germany and Italy and Japan as being the bad guys in his Four Freedoms speech. And he realized that this is the equivalent of an economic declaration of war against him, against Italy, against Japan. He has, technically, lend-lease and cash carry were open to everybody. But Italy and Germany and Japan cannot do the trade, cannot carry the stuff, do not have the cash. They don't qualify. And like I said, you can't load up a sub with all that. So what you start to see in America through this lend-lease program is just a blatant side taken in this war. And there's nothing wrong with that. We've declared our allegiance to the Allied side, which in this case means Britain. And though we are technically still sort of, if you look at the public opinion polls, we're still mostly an isolationist leaning country. We are taking a side. We're trying very hard to take this side without involving ourselves directly in the war, fighting in the war. And so we're helping by manufacturing all these wartime materials that Britain needs and it's sending them. It's not even a requirement now that they come back and carry it. We're now sending it to Britain. And Hitler, who's watching all this, realizes it's kind of like we're sort of in a similar situation right now with the Russia-Ukraine war, where Putin knows that this war cannot go on forever because if the Americans ever fully commit to giving the Ukrainians everything they need to fight this war, um, Ukraine is technically a proxy. Their war is really with the United States, and they cannot afford, if they can't defeat Ukraine. It's been, I think, 3 years now. Well, what's the chances they're going to defeat the United States? And so I don't know what Putin's going to do, but I think what he wanted to do was win the war quick. And that hasn't happened. And the reason it hasn't happened is because Ukraine's got all this aid coming from the United States, the West, from Europe, etc., and all the NATO countries. So it's making it harder. It's not just a head-to-head war between Russia and Ukraine, which means it's not just a head-to-head war now between Germany and England. He is now essentially fighting the United States because everything Britain has is coming from the United States. Money, medical supplies, war materials, ships, everything. Here's you can see some of the countries that benefited from our lend-lease program. As I said, it originally started with just the UK, but then as new allies needed things like the Soviets after the Germans invaded and became our ally, Africa, the Middle East, Mediterranean, China, Australia, New Zealand, India. So you can just add all that up and you can see it's a lot of money. And that wasn't total. That's it. That was just sort of a snapshot. And think about if you're Germany, who of these countries are you fighting? Are you fighting Britain? Yes, you are. Are you fighting the Soviets? Yes, you are, because you invaded them. Are you fighting in Africa and the Middle East? Yes. Rommel's down there trying to take all their oil. The Japanese are fighting in China, Australia. So all of these Axis powers are fighting through this in this Lend-Lease program an enemy that's not even on the battlefield yet. By August of 41, FDR and Churchill met secretly. Now, we're not even in the war yet. Remember, it's not until December of 41 that Japan attacks us at Pearl Harbor. But that's just a technicality, right? And so here is Churchill meeting with FDR, and they are planning the post-World War II world. They're already thinking ahead to when this war is over. Churchill, as we will learn tomorrow, knows that it's a matter of time for the United States to get involved. And when the United States gets involved, Russia's already involved. It'll be curtains for the Axis powers. He knows that. FDR knows that. Stalin knows. They all know it. It's a matter of time. You say, well, how do they know? Trust me, they know. They're just priming the pump with the American people. The American public opinion, it takes a while to form. It was 100 years of isolationism. It's going to take a while to change to become interventionists, especially on the heels of World War One. We got to do this all over again. So they're just meticulously, patiently biding their time, propagandizing the American people. They're just waiting for an event, a precipitating event, a false flag, if you will. They'll push the American people across the finish line. So at this meeting, they produced a document, the Atlantic Charter, in which they endorsed, when this war is all over, national self-determination, which means nation states get to determine their own fates. Now, this is, if you go back, this is exactly what Wilson proposed in his 14 points. That was rejected after World War I at Versailles. But times have changed. In fact, FDR took this opportunity to try to, he chided Churchill a little bit about Britain's far-flung world empire. Say you're going to have to give up some of your colonies to make this post-war world work. All of these imperialist ambitions by these few countries, including us, is the reason we've had World War I and now we're in World War II. They also talk about an international system of general security, an alliance, which remember, that's another thing Wilson proposed. But the alliance has to be above board, where everybody knows who's with whom. We now call that NATO. And he's even going to propose a body whereby nations can get together and talk out their problems before it results in fighting, which eventually becomes the United Nations. This, too, is something that Woodrow Wilson proposed in his 14 points. He didn't call it the United Nations, he called it the League of Nations. So you see what's happening. Wilson's ideas are being regurgitated. He was ahead of his time, evidently. But now, after World War II, and of course, this is 41, we're not even in the war yet. And when we do join, we got 4 years ahead of us, but they're already talking about 46. And of course, a reaffirmation of the special relationship, alliance between the United States and Britain, whereby there is no space between us. As anything that we're involved in, they're going to rubber stamp. Anything they're involved, we're going to rubber stamp. Any attack against one is considered an attack against the other. No space, a special relationship. And of course, when you look at what's already occurred and what is occurring at the time that they signed this, we jumped into World War I. Part of the reason was to help Britain. They were going to lose. Now, that wasn't the only reason, but that was part of the reason. World War II, it's going to be all about helping Britain again. Just like Britain always comes to France's defense, World War I, World War II, we always come to Britain's defense. Now, Hitler again is watching all this, and he realizes that though we are claiming to be neutral, we are really supporting Britain. And of course, his front line, his generals, they're telling him, hey, listen, everything we're being shot at with, this is all American-made stuff. The ships are American-made. The tanks are American-made. The anti-aircraft guns are American-made. Everything's American-made. It's all come from America. So he orders his U-boats to attack American ships. Now remember, to stay out of the war, initially, Cashandcarry said, we're not going to tote anything across the ocean because first time one of our ships goes down, the American people are going to lose their minds. And that was how the American people want it. We don't want to get pulled into another war like World War I, Lusitania. We don't want another Lusitania. Now, after Lendlease, we're shipping stuff across. And so this is Hitler's opportunity to make America hurt for its support of Britain. So he orders just a unlimited German sub-warfare against American ships. So in response, FDR orders the U.S. Navy, which is escorting these convoys, to attack German U-boats on site. Now, we have not declared war on Germany yet. They have not declared war on us, but we are at war. We are firing at them. They are firing at us. Why? Because we are shipping goods across the Atlantic to their enemy, Britain. So war is inevitable. This is why Churchill and FDR met. They knew it was inevitable. It's just a matter of time. We're just waiting for the attack. We're waiting for the precipitating event. How do we know one's going to happen? We'll cover that tomorrow. But just like we knew the Lusitania was going to be sent into harm's way and would sink, kill a bunch of Americans, we know something's fixing to happen that's going to force the American people's hand. And now FDR will respond to the pressure applied by the American people. Just like the American government responded by claiming to be neutral when the American people were so vocal about not getting in the war. When the American people changed their minds and say, hey, uh, uh, we need to defend ourselves, then he will respond, Congress will respond, and then everything will be above board. But we're already at war with the Germans before Pearl Harbor. We're already at war. And what we'll learn in the next chapter is that we are technically at war with Japan as well. None of it's been declared. None of it's been publicized, but everything that's coming out of our government, the decisions that are being made are acts of war against belligerents. We are taking a side, and we have authorized our Navy to fire on the enemy, an enemy that we haven't declared war against. But anyway, I hope you get the point. War is inevitable. So I wanted to, in this chapter, to just lay the groundwork, the backstory to where we are and how we started as isolationists, this whole thing. We're going to stay out of Europe's problems. But one decision leads to a second decision, which leads to a third decision. Every action has a reaction. And eventually, after a few years, we get to the point where we're no longer staying out of Europe's problems. We have a special relationship with Britain that we care very deeply about. So not only are we helping them, we're not forcing them to pay cash for it anymore. We're giving it to them. And we're not forcing them to carry anymore. We're bringing it to them. Oh, and if that means the Germans are going to have a problem with that, we're firing at their subs because they're going to fire at us. So we're definitely at war with Germany. We've taken a side. We're helping their enemy, its enemy. And as you'll learn tomorrow, we're doing the same thing to a little bit different degree, but we're doing the same thing with Japan and Far East. So this is how these power elites work. They're behind the scenes, pulling strings, pushing us in a direction. And what we'll find out tomorrow, the entire time, propagandizing the American people, the public opinion changes to the extent where it goes from being opposed to the war to supporting the war. And then they act. But none of these events are organic. None of them are random or just happen circumstantially. They're planned meticulously, they're carried out, and there's always a purpose. So we'll talk about more of that tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and feel free to subscribe to my channel, share the channel. Feel free to comment and smash the like button. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.